Israel's prime minister will not go quietly. The question for his opponents is whether they can repair the damage he has inflicted. On Wednesday, Benjamin Netanyahu was toppled from power after 12 consecutive years as Israel's prime minister. He served an earlier 3-year term as well, making him the longest-serving leader in the country's history. There may well be twists and turns yet to come. The Knesset has not sworn in the new government, and Netanyahu may be able to peel off right-wing members of Yair Lapid's coalition. In recent years, it has sometimes felt like everything can be imagined except the end of the man who rules Israel. Even if he is removed, we know he will not be done. But at this point it is worth considering his reign, which has offered little in the way of achievements. At home, he ruled by division. Not only did he demonize the usual suspects, such as the leftists and assorted activists, he even raged against human rights groups for testifying to UN tribunals about possible war crimes and passed legislation compelling them to reveal publicly their foreign donors. He demonized his political opponents and went far beyond mere disagreement. Netanyahu's opponents were traitors to the nation. They would sell out the country by permitting a Palestinian state and would be soft on Hamas and let the rockets to fly once again, the prime minister said. Even within his own Likud party, Netanyahu tossed away former protégés like stale bread. His chiefs of staff were notorious for becoming his fiercest political rivals. In fact, the prime minister-designate, Naftali Bennett, once served in that very role, as did Avigdor Lieberman, who cut his political teeth under Netanyahu. Even his mentors, like former President Reuven Rivlin, who helped bring him to power, were viewed as threats. When Rivlin ran for president, the prime minister ran an ultimately failed campaign to sabotage his candidacy. No coherent vision. Netanyahu hardly espouses a coherent political program around which his supporters could rally. He relied mainly on an ultranationalist settler ideology that has permeated Israeli society and now dominates the levers of state power. He built tens of thousands of new homes in settlements. Under his rule, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians continued from their lands both in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. His goal became, along with his settler patrons, to destroy any possibility of a Palestinian state. In this he was wildly successful. Currently, no political party, even those purporting to be left-wing, has made Palestinian national rights a priority. Centrist and leftist politicians downplay such views. You hardly ever hear support for a two-state solution. The only figures advancing this argument are U.S. Democrats and American Jewish liberal Zionists. In 2018, Netanyahu shepherded the nation-state law to its passage in the Knesset. It excluded Palestinian citizens of Israel from any official national status. Arabic was no longer an official state language. Henceforth, Israel was to be a state of, and for, Jews only. Palestinians, who became citizens of the state in 1948, felt deeply disrespected. Their rights, such as they were, have been trampled on. In fact, one can trace the riots which spread like wildfire throughout mixed Jewish-Palestinian towns in Israel last month to this hated legislation. As part of his long-standing efforts to concentrate power in his hands, Netanyahu succeeded in controlling much of the nation's media. Some of these efforts involved orchestrating deals in which corporate executives were rewarded financially for offering favorable political coverage. Currently, Netanyahu is on trial on 3 separate criminal counts. Had the new governing coalition not been formed, a guilty verdict would have forced him to resign. External enemies. Regionally, the fear Netanyahu generated among Israelis over external enemies created an artificial sense of cohesion, permitting him to unite the country in the face of such hostile forces. He needed enemies like Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah in order to preserve his hold on the Israeli electorate. He launched a decade-long terror campaign against Tehran and what he claimed was its attempt to gain regional dominance. He directed Mossad to sabotage Iran's nuclear program by assassinating scientists and bombing missile bases and nuclear facilities. Netanyahu ordered air strikes against Iran's military bases in Syria and mounted strikes on Hezbollah, one of Tehran's major regional allies, which also fought alongside Syrian government forces. In 2014, Netanyahu launched Operation Protective Edge by invading Gaza to stamp out rocket attacks against Israel. Over 2,300 Palestinians died. The vast majority were civilians. The attack led to a ceasefire, but resolved none of the major outstanding issues dividing Hamas from Israel. Last month, facing a new onslaught of Hamas missiles fired in response to Israeli police brutality at Al-Aqsa Mosque and in solidarity with Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, Netanyahu again mounted an offensive against Gaza. This time, the military operation lasted only 11 days due to the intervention of U.S. President Joe Biden. Hundreds of Palestinians died. Unlike the previous assaults, neither Israelis nor the world were persuaded by Netanyahu's claims that Israel was only defending itself from Hamas rockets. Instead, they viewed the merciless Israeli airstrikes as acts of aggression against a civilian population. The war had no strategic objective other than helping to keep Netanyahu in power, since his political rivals did not dare to plot against him as long as the country was at war.